Thank you, Jeff. And thanks again to all of you in the audience for joining today's event. My name is Michael Schrader, as Jeff mentioned, and I'm the Vice President of Intelligence and Innovative Solutions at Carahsoft Technology Corp. Carahsoft, my team specializes in helping to introduce public sector customers to innovative and disruptive technologies that aid them to better achieve their mission and drive down costs. We're happy to be a part of today's event and to hear from leaders across government, industry, and defense about how they're enhancing data security and using technology to prevent threats. I'm excited to introduce today's opening keynote speaker. Jim Pflaging is the founder of and managing partner of Cynergy Partners, where he works closely with technology companies and investors to identify, acquire, and build companies and advise executives on assessing risk and improving their cyber governance. Before creating Cynergy Partners, Jim spent more than 30 years working in Silicon Valley, including 15 years as CEO of cybersecurity and data management companies, and several years working at the Chertoff Group, a security advisory firm. He also serves on the board of directors of several private technology companies. Today, he'll be discussing the evolution of the identity market, including how the identity conversation has shifted from IT ops to compliance to security to business enablement. I'm so excited. He'll be sharing his expertise with us today. Please join me in welcoming Jim Pflaging to the stage.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody, for sharing your time with me today. It is great for me to be back in DC. I'm a DC native. Was born in Northwest, and I have great memories as a young lad at RFK with my dad watching the George Allen era Redskins, and actually for the really old people in the room, that brief time when Lombardi was coach as well. So this weekend, but I'm now a Niners fan. And yes, I know. So this weekend, I was reminded what a great football community this whole DC, Maryland, Virginia area is. It's a great game. But also seeing those fans in that pouring rainstorm, I was like, man, these are diehards. Do we have any Ravens fans in the house?
Yes.
Yes, a few. Good. All right. Well, it might not be a bad game to play again in February, to have those same two teams back there. It'd be fun. Okay, well, enough of that. Identity. I think for a lot of security professionals, identity is now a primary security building block. I think you can sum it up in one word. And that's more. More users, more devices, more apps, more sensitive information online. And identity is the river that runs through it and connects it all, isn't it? And you know that here in this market, where identity is fundamental to large programs like CDM, and for shorter initiatives like one a couple years ago, what was at the Cyber Sprint. Okay, so this is an issue that you understand well. So there's really 2 points that I'd like to cover today. Probably not nearly as eloquent as Michael laid out for me to do, but the first one is to give you one guy's perspective on the identity market, where it's been and where it is going, and then what does that mean for us as I've got to deal with this to implement it across my organization, or if I'm a technology supplier or a service supplier, what does that mean for me? And then the second thing is something that I call the 3 T's of the digital economy. And this is a framework that I personally have found useful in discussing technology with mission leaders, with board directors, in a way that they really grok what we're trying to do. So let's go ahead and get started. And I've been told there's 2 buttons, so I'll hopefully get the right one here. I haven't already yet, but let's go ahead next to the next one. So we all know that identity is more than access. I think I like to describe it as a 3-legged stool: access, privilege, and governance. And it involves many different things in terms of what it is and where it's going. I think some of the capabilities like MFA are clearly more of a security swim lane. Things like governance have definitely that, but also risk management and some compliance capabilities as well. And for customers to have to make sense of all this, it often involves tying together multiple vendors, some with a mix of SaaS and perpetual license, sort of pulling that all together. And it's not easy, is it? okay? For large companies, they can pull it off and make it work. But for small business, smaller entities, even some mid-sized entities, it can be a little bit daunting. The concepts of actually making identity work can be complex in and of themselves, and they're often involved a long tail of service and implementation. And now, as many people are moving towards the cloud, they're looking for technology providers and identity specifically to help them with that journey, to help them address some of the new use cases that come with that. And you see a bunch of new companies popping up in this market. And that's what I mean by there's many new entrants here. This is going to be a large and important market for years to come. So how do we kind of take that conversation and make it relevant when you're speaking with senior leadership? Every organization is on this digital journey, somehow using technology to help sort of define the mission, enable the business. But having that conversation with senior leadership can sometimes be difficult to have it in a way that they get it and they understand. So I guess the question I often ask CISOs or CIOs is, how are you going to respond? How are you going to present that up to procurement, to mission leadership, to your boards? And personally, I found this a lot easier through a lens of something that I call the 3 T's of the digital economy. And this is technology, threat, and trust. Now, these are 3 big interrelated ideas that together have a profound impact on strategy, on policy, and on public opinion. And I think it's useful to know what these are, but I've actually would challenge everybody to think about how you can leverage the first one, and that's technology, how you can best react to the second one, and that's threat, and then shape the third one, and that's trust. Now, it may be just because I've been living in Silicon Valley too long, but I think that it's pretty clear that we are living in the golden age of innovation. If you take the combined impact of these tectonic shifts, cloud, mobility, open source, AI, quantum, IoT, it seems clear that every organization, every leadership team has to stop and assess, do we still have a valid business model? Are we doing everything that we can do to create loyalty, to deliver the best goods and services? I mean, ask yourself, do you want to be Blockbuster or Netflix? Do you want to be that person that is a roadblock to the young warfighter or analyst, or that person who really is a hero in helping them achieve the change that they want to see? You see, to me, it's pretty clear that the winners are going to be those who lean in and really take advantage of technology to create competitive advantage. That's the first T. Unfortunately, this golden age, it has a dark side. See, holes in these new platforms, whether it's cloud or mobility, et cetera, have allowed bad guys to kind of create holes and create risks in these platforms. And those risks take the form of what? Cyber threat. And we know that the threats and the actors are getting more and more sophisticated, and the impact into the organization is more and more serious. And that's the second T, and that's threat. And that's sad because we all know that one of the impacts of these breaches is an erosion of trust. Trust that citizens have in government, trust that consumers have in business, and quite understandably, trust that government has back in industry. And we all know how important trust is to anything that we have to do, so this is not a good situation. So the next topic I'd like to cover is, how is identity evolving to meet IT requirements? And then specifically, for those of you who have to make sense of all these technologies in your world, how do you pull all that together? And what I'd like to do, if I can, before I jump over to that, is kind of use a 3-page vignette. I'd like to use a yesterday, a today, and tomorrow, and consider how has the broader IT environment changed? How does that force leadership in the IT and security world to what they need to do to react to that? And then from that, I think we can glean some ideas on how identity technology has changed and where it will go. So the proverbial yesterday, if you start with the C-suite, it used to be security was their issue, their responsibility. It was the domain of big companies, big government agencies, and from a CEO's perspective, that wasn't really something I worried about. That was those guys down the hall. Compute was centralized, or maybe it was in a private cloud. Devices, this was the time when we were beginning to deal with BYOD. Smartphones were beginning to occur and people were bringing them into the enterprise, and we had to deal with that. From a security management point of view, the motif was what? It was about network security. It was about strong walls. And this was the days when the first generation SIEM and log management systems came about, and we had things like focusing on correlating events and collecting and analyzing logs. And this was also a time when compliance was absolutely a very clear driver for purchases of a lot of security products. Log management is one, WAF is another example, data access monitoring is a third example. You can go down the list. The compliance was clearly a driver. And identity really wasn't central to the security conversation, was it? That was more about provisioning, password reset. It was something that was more in the area of IT ops or sysops. Security and fraud were nascent but emerging use cases around the identity domain. So fast forward to today, and you may look at this and go, this isn't today. I've been dealing with this for a few years. But kind of humor me for a minute. This is sort of phase 2, where starting from the C-suite again, most of the C-suite, most mission leadership, they get it. They get that security is a top risk. And for some organizations, for some industries, it's probably their top business risk. Compute has changed a lot, hasn't it? Compute, we're now in many centers of compute is typical for an enterprise or for an agency, this kind of hybrid environment. Devices, many, many, many more devices, more sophisticated devices than we could have imagined 10 years ago accessing the network. And security management has changed quite a bit too. The focus isn't on walls, it's much more about behavior. It's much more about anomaly detection and response. And security management systems, they're actually taking use of things like AI and machine learning. They're getting smarter and they're moving into the cloud. And then from a compliance point of view, many of the domains, or many of the regimes rather, are on a second or third iteration. They're much more prescriptive about what you need to do, how long you need to collect, retain, and analyze information. And we're probably in what, the second or third inning of the various data privacy regimes, GDPR, and now as that comes into the states, those are all things that we have to deal with in our IT and security environment. But I think the biggest change has probably been in the area of identity, where maybe this started a couple years ago, where you started to hear people say identity is the new perimeter, it's the new security perimeter. And identity really became, for many CISOs, one of, if not their number one security building block. And I think it gets back to that notion of more. More devices, more users, more apps. Some firms have hundreds or thousands of apps. And identity is that river that cuts through and connects it all. And particularly when you look at identity governance, who has access? What did they do? Is this what we expected to happen? So it's no surprise that in this period that you saw the creation of some really interesting new, now public identity companies, SailPoint, Okta, CyberArk, and some other very interesting private identity companies as well. So where's this headed? I think from the C-suite, if we go back again to that 3 T's, I think it's going to become more commonly understood at mission leadership or at the C-suite that trust and privacy really matter. It matters for stakeholder loyalty. It matters to create competitive advantage. And you can toss simplicity in there as well. Compute, cloud, it's going to continue to skyrocket, not just for young companies who had a greenfield, no IT environment, for even the largest, the most conservative organizations are going to continue to move and embrace the cloud. Compute is going to move more to the edge, driven by things like IoT and peer-to-peer networks like blockchain and other in the financial networks and systems. And devices, billions and billions and billions of chatty, maybe not so intelligent things are going to need to get connected. Memory-constrained things. Security management. It's going to focus more and more on making hard simple. Focus on automation, deeper use of smart technology, AI, machine learning, things that can make recommendations and make your life easier. And I think that we'll also begin to see that the major cloud providers step up and begin to provide much more security management natively as options within their own platforms. And then on compliance, and maybe this gets more into sort of a policy issue, you could argue that we're already seeing the beginning of data wars. You can look at, what the Europeans, their take on the American tech companies. You can begin to see this be part of a broader economic and trade policy. It certainly has impacts on technology companies, SaaS companies, as they lay out how to approach different markets around the world. I think we're going to see more and more of that. We're going to see more and more data privacy regimes come into the States, and we're beginning to see that, particularly in California now is one of the areas where we're seeing and dealing with that. And then in identity, what's coming is, boy, I wish I had $1 for every company that's now talking about zero trust. Okay? But I think there is a there. And I think identity platforms will become zero trust based. That's going to become sort of the ticket. Areas like privilege are going to change a lot, because privilege used to be watch the watchers. But privilege now is going to extend to DevOps use cases. And that developer who wants to get access to a workload in the cloud, you're going to see privilege on demand, or privilege maybe in the context of where you are. You're going to need to apply privilege to these memory-constrained things, like devices in the operating room, other IoT devices that are going to need privilege attached to them. They can't be reached by Active Directory. Maybe they have something like a web UI. How do you apply that and make that work? These are all challenges that are going to need to be addressed as we move forward. So when you look at how identity is going to continue to evolve, I think it's safe to say that these issues on the right, and I'm not going to go through all of those one by one, that if you look through them, customers are going to want all of those or most of them now or in the near future. And I think stepping back, you can say, so identity systems are probably going to need to be more SaaS first, not SaaS only, because there's markets clearly here in defense and intelligence where you need on-prem, but more SaaS first and compliance ready. They're going to need to be easier and simpler. And overall, they're going to need to be smarter, have deeper use of AI, machine learning, to be able to make a recommendation for you, to be able to simplify a business process for you so that you can begin to move out of the plumbing and move more into the business enablement for your organization. And what does this mean from a business point of view? Well, I think that you're going to continue to see a lot of innovation. Interesting young startups get started to attack some of these new use cases, but a lot of consolidation from the leading vendors, and the leading vendors like SailPoint, who are going to say, let's take that, fold it into a platform that continues to expand and plays a bigger part of that three-legged stool, to take away the complexity of managing a complete identity platform for customers. So this is a slide that I've used for a few years, and it's one that I found very, very helpful in conversations with board members or mission leaders. And an attempt to tie together some of the concepts that we've talked about this morning. And it starts with this belief, and I do believe this, is that identity is the fundamental security building block There's other important ones, application security and data security, but I think it starts with identity. And then with your senior leadership, your mission leaders, your board members, start with this conversation around the 3 T's, technology, threat, and trust. Give them examples of what's going on with relevant peers, how they successfully or unsuccessfully manage some really key events. Tie that together with the initiatives that you're proposing and show a direct line to the improvement on risk management and value creation ultimately. And if you can do that, I think that conversation is going to end up discussing who has access. What did they do? Is this really what we expected? That's a heck of a lot more successful business conversation than showing them a bunch of NIST controls. That is like get the BlackBerry or the phone out and start looking. They're not going to pay attention to that. And if you do that, then I think as a technology leader, you can really then begin to look across the table with the other business leaders or the other people in the mission and talk about outcomes. Like how do we improve our resiliency to risk? How do we increase the efficiency of our organization? How do we improve stakeholder and customer loyalty? And ultimately, how do we create competitive advantage? Right? That's what this is really all about. And I think if we can do that, the world's going to look a lot different. I think it's going to enable you as security or IT professionals to sit at a more equal seat across the table and really bring value to the people across your organization. And I think if vendors continue to do that too, they're going to focus on things that matter to the people in this room. I'm actually really bullish on this because I think if you could say it's happening today, SailPoint's an example of a company who is making it happen. I'm thrilled to work with these guys. And I think if we have this conference or something like it in 3 to 5 years, my prediction is you're going to see identity have an even bigger role at the table as far as the other technologies in your sort of building blocks and begin to see much more directly how identity also can really help drive and enable the business. So that's what I got this morning. I'll stick around a little bit through the day if anybody would like to follow up and have any questions. And once again, thank you very much for the chance to speak with you today. Thank you.